Hello and welcome to Why Conflict, a podcast that identifies ongoing conflicts and goes right into the heart of the matter with stakeholders and experts. I am Komal Godara
And I'm Janab Guha.
at New Imaginations, a research center on peace, conflict, and justice.
The past few months have been quite eventful for the country, from protests over the NEET paper leaks to growing anger over the education system. We have seen thousands of young people take to the streets demanding accountability. The protests eventually led to the resignation of the Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan and were hailed as a major Gen Z victory. But this is not the first time that young people have shaken up governments. In Bangladesh, we've seen student protests bringing down Sheikh Hasina's government. In Nepal, Gen Z protests forced Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to resign. So, what is behind this wave of youth dissent? Is the Gen Z emerging as a new political force? And what does that mean for governments?
To discuss these questions, we are joined by journalist and author Mr. Salil Tripathi to discuss further and dissect the Gen Z movement. Mr. Salil Tripathi lives in New York and is a contributing editor at The Caravan and writes for The Mint. He is also chair of PEN International's Writers in Prison Committee. And additionally, he is also a widely published author. We're honored to have you here with us, Mr. Tripathi.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So the first question is Nepal toppled a prime minister, Bangladesh toppled a prime minister. Well, India didn't. We did see that Modi's government survived and even went into negotiations with the Cockroach Janata Party rather than crushing it outright. So is that a sign that India's democracy still works, or that was this a narrower, more containable sort of a protest which had one minister, one resignation next to Nepal and Bangladesh's full regime change movements?
I think there's a lot to unpack in what you have described here, and let's try to take it step by step. In Nepal, it was a true Gen Z protest because social media applications were banned by the government, and it was an outrage over that. And I think if there were to be a similar ban tomorrow on Instagram, for example, in India, I imagine something similar taking place, that people getting very angry and collective anger on one issue. In Bangladesh, it was far more complicated because Bangladesh, while it has had elections since 2008, when Hasina first came to power, the second time that she came to power, but for a long stint, the elections after that, the opposition has boycotted them, or there has been widespread rigging, allegations of that at least. So people have never felt represented. So the anger in Bangladesh was a lot severe and a lot deeper because it went into the basically very Manichaean politics that the country has had. India has had history of agitation. The remarkable thing about what happened in India is that there was some kind of, the government did relent in the sense that it did sacrifice a minister. That hasn't happened in the past. People have had many complaints, and other than MJ Akbar, when he was not even a minister, but when he had to leave after the Me Too allegations came out, you've never had the Modi government ever accepting it. And now, why it could be something very shrewd on the part of the Modi government, which is figuring out very early that this is an issue that cannot be turned into a communal one or a caste one or an inflation one or a rich versus poor one. Every child who's ambitious at a time when jobs are so few is affected by it. And I think that's why I think you saw the outcome the way it did. And at the same time, it's also interesting that, it was very focused on one issue. I mean, if it had been a larger one about seeking Modi's resignation, then it would have been a very different thing. But everything I say, you must put a big caveat. I'm speaking from like 8,000 or 10,000 miles away, and I've not been to Jantar Mantar for more than a year. I've not been to India since February. So, I mean, I'm only saying what I'm seeing on television, on radio, listening to to podcasts and stuff like that. So just take it with a huge chunk of salt, not just a pinch of salt.
Sir, but you just said that Nepal's Gen Z protest was a true Gen Z movement. Would you say the same for India? And if not, then why?
I think if you see Gen Z movement as in a light-hearted way, as something that young people want to do because they're rebellious, then Nepal seems more like that, because I don't think the Nepali movement, which I haven't followed very closely, so I may be completely wrong here, but I don't think it set out to remove the government. It set out to restore a particular thing, but the forces conspired to lead to that outcome. So that's what happened there. Whereas in India, while it is a Gen Z movement, it was a very serious issue. I mean, the youth unemployment rate is very high. Getting into medical colleges is almost impossible. Even if you go abroad, then it's incredibly expensive for people to do so. And when you come back, you have to requalify for your test. You go to China, you go to Ukraine. People are going everywhere these days for medical degrees. When they come back, it becomes harder. So and it's a rising expectation and limited opportunities. So it became something more powerful than that. I think if we want to look at a parallel with what happened in India, frankly, I would go back to 1974 in Gujarat, which is when you had the Navnirman Andolan, as they call it, by Manishi Jani, Umakant Mankad, and others, which started out, you know what it was, the starting point was they were angry over the rise of price of a cup of tea at a canteen in a university. Okay. And they started protesting. And then it snowballed into what was a very real issue, which was the corruption of Chimanbhai Patel's government. And then, of course, Morarji Desai goes on a hunger strike, and then, Patel has to quit, and then elections take place, and Janta Morcha, as it was called then, of Babubhai Patel comes to power. So if you look at that history, that's the trajectory to follow here. That it's a homegrown thing that youth and young people in India have always resisted, have always agitated. I mean, this is not the first time. I mean, Bengal is full of movement. Most of the early freedom fighters, young women who would go and shoot the colonial administrator, I mean, Priti Wadedar, and there are stories like that from Chittagong conspiracy and so on. So, I mean, this kind of youthful exuberance, that's what Jayaprakash Narayan tried to capitalize on in 1974 again. Sampurna Kranti ab nara hai, baki itihas hamara hai. That was his famous slogan in the 73-74 period. So I think youth politicization is not a new thing in India. It's very, very common in places like Bengal, I mean, and Bangladesh for that matter. But I think what happened was here the seriousness was slightly more. I'm not trying to undermine the Nepali protests at all, don't get me wrong. But I think there was a very genuine, concrete issue rather than, not being able to send emails to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Also, protesters, especially in this protest, have been using memes, satire, irony as their primary language. So do you think is irony or satire and similar, one-liners, are they replacing anger as the default emotional register of this protest and going forward? And
That's a great, yeah, sorry, go on.
no, does that make this movement harder for the government to demonize?
It is harder to demonize because, I mean, it does look very weird when the emperor shouts at the jester who says you have no clothes, right? I mean, because what can you do? I mean, it's exactly why the stand-up comedians are becoming the most effective form of opposition today in India. Kunal Kamra and people like that, as against the regular news. I mean, Wire and Article 14 and Scroll and Pari Network. All of them are doing amazing journalism. But it's in the periphery. It's on online. Main newspapers are slightly, I mean, better than what but broadcast media is completely under the control of the state. Now, in that kind of, I mean, even if it's not owned by the state, so at that time, the outlet has been reduced. And so when you're not able to do anything, of course, there is option of going violent, and fortunately, no one has thought of violence as an option. And I don't think, because I think that in spite of everything, Gandhian influence still does prevail in India about when it comes to mass agitations. But I think that's the reason why I think it was very interesting to see the way the memes, and because once you start ridiculing someone, what can you do? You can't ridicule back. I mean, you can't ridicule back 19 and 23-year-old students. And even if you make them apologize, they'll come and laugh at you. Police wale, uncle, danda maar do, there's some such song going on these days that I saw. I mean, it's just that you what can you do to protest like that, where they're, willing to take it? And these are the kids, and someone put it very well, that this is the conflict between the WhatsApp generation and the Insta generation. And I think there's a lot to it, that the uncles and aunties have been sending messages about how great Hinduism is and Sanatan Dharma is by WhatsApp messages. And the kids are laughing because they see the reality. And, they say that, you people have voted this government in, and now we have to live under it.
And also because we're talking about this vocabulary of dissent, which is obviously very different from how it's been in earlier protests as well. But the state force is something that we've seen in a student protest as largely as peaceful as the Cockroach Janta Party protest has been. So we've all looked at the 20th July brutality that took place in New Delhi. I myself was a part of that. But you have been in New York, so you've been looking at it obviously from a distance. So how did the violence pan out? What did you feel about it? Was state repression necessary that day?
It was not at all necessary to start with. I mean, there are so many. The thing is, all politicians have egos, and because they have large egos, they don't know how to nip things in the bud. I mean, when Sonam Wangchuk joined the campaign, senior ministers should have gone right away to have a conversation with him and try to co-opt it. But they didn't want to do that because the government did not want to be challenged. Because the government believes its own propaganda, as it were, that it is incredibly popular. And yes, it probably, if you hold an election tomorrow, the BJP might come back to power. I'm not denying that even for a minute. That there's a change about to happen. There are some people have been writing. Prem Shankar Jha has written a piece about it, saying that this is the beginning of the end. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in that way at all. But I think, I honestly thought that Dharmendra Pradhan will not resign, that Modi will not give in on that. So I was surprised, let me put it that way, when that happened. So it's interesting, but they will get rehabilitated. Smriti Irani has been rehabilitated just last week or this week earlier. So that doesn't surprise me that that's the likely outcome. So I think that should have been the response to it at that time, to nip it in the bud and not let it grow. But they let it grow. They thought that they will be able to use words like Dimagi Naxal and Khan Market Gang and all kind of, and demonize the young students. But then they realized that the students included their own children and their own nephews and their own nieces. And I mean, I don't want to glorify it and make it mawkish and sentimental, but there was enormous sincerity when you hear someone like Neha, the young AISA student, and when you just realize that they're coming from great sincerity, commitment, and conviction, and they're committed to the idea of India. They're not committed to some narrow personal rationale of their own.
Right. And so Bangladesh's Gen Z movement, it was a successful protest, but it ended up not winning anything, when the elections came, and it kind of phased out. Do you think the CJP movement, everyone has been asking questions and there have been debates about this. Do you think this will actually translate into something, especially now that Abhijit Dipke has been, going to schools, trying to expose the reality on ground? So do you think this has a political future in terms of ballot boxes, in terms of elections?
I'll come to that in a second, but let me explain the Bangladesh part because it's a very good question. What happened in Bangladesh was that the students who were leading the movement let down the women. The entire campaign was, women were an extremely important part of that campaign. But as soon as politics became prominent, the students took over with the Jamaat's assistance. And the women were all sidelined, and Umama Fatima and other great leaders of the women's movement actually pulled out and they resigned their posts. And they became an ally of the of the new establishment that was going to take, and they won only 6 seats in the parliament. I mean, they were completely a spent force, and now they are and the whole drama, what should have led to a transformation, instead what it has happened is that it's a repeat to the old scenario that the Awami League is replaced by BNP, and who knows, the next change might be something similar like that. So that's worth keeping in mind, that it was the betrayal within the movement of the women that led to it. Now, CJP, whether it can become a party, I honestly don't know, because you can have millions of followers online, whether it translates into the ballot box, the way elections are held, the way there has been state capture, the way the SIRs are being implemented, who gets the right to vote, who doesn't. If, for example, these students have FIRs registered against them, and therefore, if they're not allowed, they're not given they're not recognized for voting. It happened to S. Rajgopal, a prominent editor of the Telegraph, that he had some inquiry from the police and therefore he wasn't given his passport and he wasn't able to vote in the elections. And if that kind of disenfranchisement takes place, I don't know. I don't know the extent to which this is an urban movement. Again, you can tell me better. You live in India, and I'm really pleased that all the young students are the Gen Alpha are going and exposing the schools and the roads to the schools, and absence of chalks, absence of blackboards, absence of teachers, absence of facilities. And I think these are really the so-called, once the elections used to be fought in India on the issues of Bijli, Sadak and Pani. And I think now, I think people are going about, Rozgari and then therefore education. I think and education as a great equalizer, and not just, and it's a great idea to focus on primary education, because too much of India's education conversation has been restricted to the IITs and IIMs and Ashokas and Jindals and all of them. Yeah.
Also, Professor, because you're living in America, in the US also, we have seen growing pressure on universities and students over campus protests. So, do you think this is part of a larger global trend of governments trying to contain and sort of suppress student dissent?
I don't know about that, because I think you're right about it. But while there has been a lot of curb on the students in America, it is on a very specific issue, which is the issue of Israel and Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, there are clearly two views in America about it. There are those who say Israel can never do anything wrong and we have to stand by them. And there are those who say that, what Israel is committing is an act of genocide and we have to stand against it. And these are both irreconcilable positions. You cannot match them at all. I mean, if you start talking about it, friendships get broken, and people come. They don't come to fist fights, but at least it becomes that difficult. And when you do that, and a lot of the organizations, the establishment in America is hugely reliant on supporting Israel on one hand, and is supported by pro-Israeli lobbies. Now, I'm not therefore saying that there's some kind of a vast conspiracy here, but a lot of the donors, for example, to universities tend to be supporters of Israel. So if they were to say that, this faculty member, he's problematic, get him out, or this art exhibition is pro-Palestine, take it away, those kinds of things have started happening. And so the attacks that have taken place, students who have been challenged are those who have unfurled the Palestinian flag during graduation and so on. Now, it is wrong by American Constitution. You can't stop that from happening, but it has been happening. But it's not like a mass unrest over. For example, there are protests against Donald Trump too, the No More Kings rally and all that. But those do not get this kind of a response. The only thing that one is Israel has been a big thing on the campus, and outside the campus, it is a response to ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Authorities. Yeah.
Right. Also, watching from New York, how differently do you think, I mean, coming to the media, because this whole movement revolved around media, how differently do you think did the Indian protests read in the international press versus the mainstream media and alternate media in India?
Okay. How did the international press see the performance of the media or of the protest itself?
Of the protest itself.
Of the protest itself, there was a lot of shock because, the way, the video images that came out of, people being beaten, charged and, pellets. The pellet story didn't get as much play as it should have, or as it did during the Kashmir incident. But, it did kind of shock people that this is the way the state is reacting. And everybody thought that this is completely and blatantly not right. And what is happening there. In terms of the media, there is now a lot of consensus here in America among those who follow media and those who follow India, that the broadcast media is completely under the thumb of the government, almost like what it was in Hungary, completely on the side of the government. Print media tries, but it's losing ground because, fewer and fewer people read newspapers. They get everything. They trust what they read on their phones rather than what they see in newspapers. But at the same time, there is a lot of respect for individual journalists. So some of them are able to get their articles published. There are independent journalists who are able to get their articles published in Guardian, in The Nation. Now, these are all progressive and left-leaning publications, but that happened. Democracy Now! Is a channel here, for example, in America, which has been doing very good work around these issues. And, speaking on the CJP and issues like that.
Professor, I have two questions that
I'm not a professor, so I'm not, yeah.
Mr. Tripathi,
You call me Salil, that's fine, yeah.
I have two questions which I'll club as we near the end of our conversation. One is that the CJP protests have obviously set a precedent for people to come up with broader grievances. So we are seeing groups now like Reservation Hatao who are protesting on these grounds. Now, these are obviously things that shouldn't be happening. Reservation is not something that we should be debating as long as casteism does exist at the rate at which it does in India. So what do you feel about that? And secondly, what do you think these protests mean for the Modi government? What do you think will be the outcome in the 29 elections? Does Modi have a chance of coming back now that more and more people are disillusioned with his regime?
I lived in England for 20 years, and they had a prime minister called Harold Wilson in the 60s. And he used to say a week is a long time in politics. Yeah. And so 2029 is like almost like a millennium away. I mean, it's impossible to predict what will happen then. It's impossible to predict, whether, delimitation bills will be introduced in the next session of the winter session of Parliament. There are lots of things that are far more urgent, and including Mr. Modi likes to win elections, so his next target is probably Punjab and,
Yeah.
and P and so on. So I think that would be his immediate target rather than that. Now, whether the other, I mean, it is obviously, one of the things that this Indian government has been very good at is that whenever there is an issue that becomes a burning issue, it's very easy for it to divert attention by coming up with a completely spurious controversy. So today, the big issue is pellets and the FIR, Rahul Gandhi needing 7.5 hours to get an FIR registered, as it happened yesterday, for example. So if that's what's happening, you come up with a campaign, about Vande Mataram, sing all the 5 stanzas, and which I think 99% of BJP's members and parliamentarians will not be able to do that. Let's put it that way. I mean, but yet that's what they, and then the completely spurious argument that Tagore wanted it banned. No, he didn't want it to be banned. He didn't want the 3rd, 4th, and 5th part, and he had a very strong reason for it. His reason was that that's where you're worshipping Durga. And if you're a Musalman in India, why should you worship a 10-headed or 10-handed goddess, for example? I mean, Hindus would not want, to you do 5 times a day a namaz. So why should we force a Muslim to do that? I mean, that was Tagore's, and Tagore himself is a Brahmo. He's not a Hindu. So Tagore himself didn't believe in this kind of idol worship. So, I mean, that was his rationale, and that's what Nehru accepted, and that's what. But this kind of subtlety is totally lost, and people are now pretending that the song was being suppressed, and that's completely wrong. But my point, I mean, we went into a digression here, but my point, therefore, is that what tends to happen that the government is very good at diverting the attention on something else, and therefore this anti-reservation thing will come up again. They've already got economically backward sections, even from so-called dominant, I would call them dominant castes. I don't call them upper castes, but those dominant castes are able to get those reservations now if they want in certain states. So I think that's going to be the Sangharsh, as we say in Gujarati and Hindi, that's going to go on.
Right. Thank you so much for the conversation. Gen Z and youth-led protests are on the rise across the world, particularly across South Asia, from Bangladesh and Nepal to India. Young people have actually shown that they can challenge governments, and in some cases, they can even force political change to happen. Now, whether that energy can translate into lasting changes in the way power is exercised, that remains to be seen. It's an open-ended question, but I think one thing is really clear from the past few days, that young people are no longer willing to simply watch from the sidelines. They're demanding answers, they're holding power to account, and they're making themselves heard.
Thank you.
And you can't be sorry. And yeah, the one last word for that, and I will you do come back after that. Is this that when you're 18, you can vote in India. When you can marry at a 21, I think. You can drive cars. You can stand for election. So to treat them as bacha and treat them pejoratively and contemptuously is a huge disrespect. And to keep talking about what happened in 1984 or 1992 is completely meaningless to this generation, which has basically known only one effective form of government since they started looking at newspapers. A 22-year-old today has seen a Modi government for 12, 13 years. And before 10, they wouldn't have cared who was the prime minister. So you have a system, it's almost like what happened in Indonesia, where, for 32 years, Suharto was ruling. And of course, there was a history before that. But people had known only one leader. And I think that's the phenomenon that I think is happening in India. Sorry, you were saying, Komal.
No, I was just wrapping up. Thank you, sir, for this conversation and for speaking to us on this podcast. And I would also like to thank the audience. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, etc., please write to us at newimaginations.jsjc@gmail.com, or you can also drop a comment. Thank you so much, Mr. Salil Tripathi, for this conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All the very best to you. Yeah. And
you.
may the force be with you, as the Star Wars thing says. That's my generation when I was a kid. For
Yeah.
you, it's an old film, of course. Yes.